here with my two hats today. Usually I try and keep them separate, but I don't speak or deal basically as joint coordinator of the Green Wedges Coalition in Kingston, where I'm a councillor, because that's where I'm a councillor. So given that I've been asked to speak about the South East Green Wedge, which of course includes Frankston and Kingston, just please assume that every time I talk about the Kingston Green Wedge, I'm speaking as a councillor. The rest of the time I'm speaking as joint coordinator of the Kingston Green Wedge. So the purposes of, I'm just wondering if I could get an idea how many people are not local. In other words, how many people have come down and don't actually live in sort of the peninsula or Frankston or, yeah, right, okay. It just gives me a sense of where to go. I guess the purposes of the Green Wedge, and the simple way of looking at the Green Wedge, you can see those maps there. The top map on the far side with the little green wedges, that was the first map of green wedges that I ever saw, and there was no urban growth boundary. It were just kind of notional green wedges pointing towards the city, and of course the idea, dates back to the Hamer government. The idea was the city was planned around having road corridors or transport corridors divided by green wedges, which would be down the river banks and farmland. And so the purpose in the planning scheme is for agriculture, environmental conservation, landscape value, natural resources and recreation values. That's in the that's the basic thing. And I think I think most people, and every time there's been a survey, most people have said they want the green wedges protected. They mightn't all be able to know exactly where the boundaries are, but we want, and exactly what the issues are, but mostly we want them protected for those purposes. And I think that those purposes are still as valid today as they were in 1971 when the Hamer government introduced them. The issue of maintaining the level of development was originally up to the Board of Works, and they were quite firm. They said no a lot of the time. Unfortunately, when the Board of Works was abolished in, I think, the 80s, the councils were given the power of dealing with applications for development in the Green Wedges. And of course, as we all know, councils are much closer to developers, way too close to developers, and so they started getting whittled away. And on that map with the Green Wedges, all of those pink bits are proposed urban developments. And so that's what was happening, and the councils were tending to say yes, and state governments too. In fact, one stage I actually was quite frustrated because I was trying to save a local park from being covered with three-storey houses. And I actually made an appointment. I had a friend who worked for the Premier. I said, I have to talk with you, I have to have coffee. I've got to tell you something. I said, our council is dominated by developers. What can we do about it? She said, our government's dominated by developers. And indeed, that's the problem. It's been a general problem that developers have too much power, and someone like the Board of Works, someone prepared to draw a line, hasn't. So it's up to us. If we want our green wedges protected, it's up to us we've got to do something about it. So the green wedges have been under serious threat. The last two governments have seen 100,000 hectares of land taken out of the green wedges by both major parties working together. Well, the first lot was both major parties working together. In the Guy government, Labor did oppose the extra 6,000 hectares that they added on. The important thing is that none of it was needed for housing supply. We've now got a 30 to 50 year housing supply in Melbourne if we go on with the urban sprawl that most of us don't want. And there was an expert independent audit committee that the Bracks government appointed to look at the need, and they said there was no need to even look at the urban growth boundary for 5 years. And later that year, Minister Madden put out these plans to expand the growth areas into the green wedges. That was the main four areas, and I suppose if we look at those, it's the southeast growth corridor is one of the big ones, the two western corridors and one northern corridor up through Whittlesea. So this area here is indeed one of the most active growth corridors, but still, of course, if we're going to go to 8 million people in Melbourne, we're going to get huge pressures here and everywhere. So the land, none of it's been developed yet, but it includes all of the Merry Creek, it includes the 5,000 hectares of the best of the Western Basal Plains grasslands, which were previously protected by the Western Green Wedges, and it includes significant environmental habitat down the South Eastern corridor, and threatens the extinction of the southern brown bandicoot in that area. And there's not too many areas in Victoria where the southern brown bandicoots are in a healthy state. Madden allowed his rezoning to run up to state election, and that contributed, I think, to Labor's loss. Matthew Guy tried to get his over early and done with. He, except in the South East Green Wedge, where Kingston didn't nominate any anomalies and Frankston only one or two. Now this map here shows the South East Green Wedge. You can see it in larger scale there, but as you can see, it's been whittled away. People have put little, Dingley Village, waterways, little housing estates, Sandhurst, so have been coming in to chop it up. The interesting thing is the anomalies process. This shows just the area of Frankston where the developments. It's hard, you won't be able to see it from there, but if you look later, you'll see the brightly coloured bits are the bits where developers came in and tried to argue that their land was an anomaly and should be rezoned. Now, Frankston Council said no to all that. They only agreed to one little bit around the Peninsula Private Hospital, and I should acknowledge that we've got David Cross and Jenny Hatting from the Frankston Friends Environment Group here, and their job is to pick me up if I get something not quite right, so I thank them for being here. So this is the Stotts Lane land, which has just been highly controversial recently. The Frankston Council, some of us were there when the Frankston Council voted to approve rezoning there. Well, what they have to vote for is to ask the Minister to authorise a planning scheme amendment to rezone that land. And that's what happened. The Frankston Council was totally indifferent to the fact that it's a koala habitat corridor, very important, beautiful piece of land. So Frankston Council voted for it, but when they finally did ask the Minister said no. Now, that's because I think he doesn't want to be seen to be, the Minister doesn't want to be seen to be rezoning Green Wedge, not this close to an election. And, that sounds a bit cynical, because they are saying in Plan Melbourne that there'll be a permanent urban growth boundary. So those are hopeful signs. The main threat to Kingston, now there's a few issues where obviously people are concerned. There's the twin service. There was, I thank Ian for going into some detail on Peninsula Link, which was a disaster for this Green Wedge, and also for talking about the Port of Hastings, which will be a new disaster, and the infrastructure corridor that will run through there will be shocking, of course. But a few others. There's land on McClellan Drive, which we were out there a week or so ago. Was a little polite demonstration at the auction for this land, which really should be turned into parkland and added to the Pollabong Nature Reserve. And nobody bid for it, so that was good. We're hoping that nobody does bid for it and that it does end up being a nature reserve. So there's various issues, but the major threats of major rezoning to Frankston comes from Kingston, because what Kingston's done is Kingston Council has also basically moved to really turn over pretty well all of the Green Wedge south of the old landfill areas. They're talking about rezoning to a rural living zone with a minimum lot size of 2,000 square metres. Now, apart from the fact the planning scheme says you can't do that because the rural living zone was phased out of the Green Wedges in 2004, the councillors are doing that. The councillors know that if they ask the Minister just now, he would say no, so they're not asking him. They're employing another consultant to have another look to see if they can find a way around it. That will take 6 to 7 months, which gets us through the election. So I'm not quite sure whether they're, one of the motivating forces here, of course, has been the fundraising before elections. And there was an excellent article, there were an excellent series of articles in The Age, and one that people might remember was called The Empress of the South East, about a very prominent local MLC called Inga Powledge, and she's generally credited with nominating the 4 candidates up this line, Jeff Shaw, Donna Bauer, Lorraine Reeford and Elizabeth Miller, who swung those 4 seats that put the government into power. So she's obviously got quite a lot of power, but she was running a group called Business First, which raised a lot of funds. A lot of the funds were raised from landholders,
many of whom expected to get their land rezoned and quite a few of whom did. And so there's a question about whether this is going on now and whether this is why this process is being strung out. They don't want no for an answer because maybe it will make it harder to raise funds before the election. So I guess the thing is, if the risk is, on one hand you think, well, they can't do it. It's just not possible in the planning scheme. But maybe they know something we don't. Maybe there'll be some hard-headed planning minister who'll take over after the election and they will put it through. So this is the threat, and if it goes through in Kingston, it will be a threat to every Green Wedge. So that's where that's where it stands. I guess I would just say that we've got an election coming up. It seems to me the two big issues along these 4 very marginal seats are public transport, which was a big issue in the last election. A lot of promises were made that weren't carried out. The same promises are being made again. I mean, are we still going to believe them? And the other thing is, of course, the Green Wedges. And I think we should know that the Green Wedges, the threat is kind of simmering at the moment, but it's there. And I think it's very important that we talk to the candidates about that, you know, particularly in the Kingston areas, where it's very, very political. The Liberal Party is very pro rezoning, and the Labor Party councillors and candidates seem to be quite conservation on that. So look, that's all I'll say on that. But I thank you all for coming, and congrats to Victoria First for being able to continually pull good meetings with a lot of new people. So thank you very much.